Sarah Martinez had always been the quiet one in her family. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched her 3 older brothers join the military, one by one, each coming home with stories of brotherhood, honor, and service. While they talked about combat and tactics, Sarah found herself drawn to something different, the idea of saving lives rather than taking them. At 18, Sarah enlisted in the Army with one clear goal: to become a combat medic. Her family was supportive but worried. Her mother would often say, "Mija, you have such gentle hands. Why put yourself in harm's way?" But Sarah knew this was her calling. She wanted to be the person who brought soldiers home to their families, the one who could make a difference when everything seemed lost. Basic training was harder than she had imagined. The physical demands pushed her small frame to its limits, but Sarah refused to give up. She woke up before dawn to do extra push-ups and ran longer distances than required. Her drill sergeants noticed her determination, and slowly, her fellow recruits began to respect her quiet strength. She wasn't the loudest or the strongest, but she was reliable. Medical training came next, and this was where Sarah truly shined. She absorbed every lesson about trauma, care, emergency procedures, and battlefield medicine. Her instructors were impressed by her quick thinking and steady hands under pressure. She could start an IV in the back of a moving vehicle, perform CPR in complete darkness, and stay calm when others panicked. These skills would prove more valuable than she could ever imagine. After completing her training, Sarah was assigned to Fort Bragg, where she joined the 82nd Airborne Division. The base was massive, filled with some of the most elite soldiers in the world. She felt small walking among paratroopers and special forces operators, but she held her head high. She was here to do a job, and she intended to do it well. Her first deployment came sooner than expected. The unit was heading to Afghanistan, to a remote forward operating base near the Pakistani border. The area was known for frequent enemy contact, and casualties were common. Sarah spent her last night in the States, calling her family, trying to sound confident while her stomach churned with nervous energy. The flight to Afghanistan was long and uncomfortable. Sarah sat among dozens of soldiers, each lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. Some slept, others wrote letters home, and a few played cards to pass the time. Sarah reviewed her medical procedures in her head, going over trauma protocols and emergency treatments. She wanted to be ready for anything. The forward operating base was smaller than she had expected, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks covered in snow even in summer. The base buzzed with constant activity, helicopters coming and going, supply trucks unloading, and soldiers preparing for patrols. Sarah was assigned to a small medical station that served the entire base. Her first few weeks were relatively quiet. She treated minor injuries, illnesses, and the occasional training accident. The other medics on base welcomed her, sharing stories and advice about working in a combat zone. They taught her about the unique challenges of desert medicine, from dealing with extreme temperatures to treating wounds contaminated with fine sand that seemed to get into everything. Sarah quickly earned a reputation for her thoroughness and gentle bedside manner. Soldiers who might have tried to tough out minor injuries found themselves seeking her help because she treated everyone with respect and genuine concern. She never made anyone feel weak for needing medical attention, and word spread that Doc Martinez was someone you could trust. The first serious casualty came on a Tuesday morning. A patrol had hit an improvised explosive device about 10 miles from bases, and the helicopters were bringing in wounded. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she prepared the medical station, laying out supplies and checking equipment. This was what all her training had prepared her for. When the helicopter landed, Sarah rushed out with the medical team. 3 soldiers were wounded, 1 critically. The most serious case was a young private who couldn't have been much older than Sarah herself. Shrapnel had torn through his leg, and he was losing blood fast. Sarah worked alongside the senior medic, holding pressure on the wound while they prepared for emergency surgery. The private kept asking if he was going to die, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah looked directly at him and said, "Not on my watch. You're going to be fine, but I need you to stay with me." She talked to him throughout the entire procedure, keeping him conscious and calm while they worked to save his leg. Her voice never wavered, even though inside she felt like she might be sick from the stress. The surgery was successful, and the private would eventually make a full recovery. As Sarah cleaned up afterward, her hands finally stopped shaking. She had done it. She had helped save a life under the worst possible circumstances. The senior medic pulled her aside and said, "Good work today, Martinez. That kid owes you his leg, maybe his life." Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly around the base. Soldiers began to look at her differently, with a new level of respect. She wasn't just the quiet medic anymore. She was someone who could be counted on when things got bad. This reputation would soon lead to opportunities she never expected. A few days later, Sarah was approached by her commanding officer. "Martinez, I've got something unusual for you," he said. "There's a joint operation coming up with some Navy SEALs. They need a medic for a mission, and your name came up. You interested?" Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Working with Navy SEALs was something she had never imagined. These were some of the most elite warriors in the world, known for their incredible physical capabilities and mental toughness. The thought of being chosen for such an assignment was both thrilling and terrifying. "What kind of mission, sir?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can't give you all the details yet," her CO replied, "but it's going to be dangerous. You'd be going into hostile territory with a small team. They specifically requested a combat medic with your qualifications. The decision is yours, but I think you should consider it." Sarah thought about her family back home, about the promises she had made to her mother to be careful. She thought about the young private whose life she had helped save just days before. This was why she had become a medic, to be there when soldiers needed her most. "I'll do it, sir," she said without hesitation. The next morning, Sarah was told to report to a secure briefing room on the other side of the base. She had spent the night checking and rechecking her medical equipment, making sure everything was perfect. She chose her best uniform and made sure her boots were polished to a shine. First impressions mattered, especially when meeting elite operators who might not take kindly to having their regular medic replaced by someone new. The briefing room was dimly lit, with maps covering the walls and several men in camouflage uniforms seated around a large table. As Sarah entered, the conversation stopped, and all eyes turned to her. She could feel them sizing her up, taking in her small stature and young face. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. "Gentlemen, this is Sergeant Martinez, your medic for the upcoming operation," announced the officer in charge of the briefing. "She comes highly recommended by her commanding officer." One of the SEALs, a tall man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos, looked Sarah up and down before speaking. "No offense, Doc, but you look like you should be in high school, not carrying a medical bag in a combat zone."
The other team members chuckled, and Sarah felt her face flush red.
She had faced skepticism before, but never from operators whose lives might depend on her skills. She stood straighter and met the bearded SEAL's gaze directly. "I understand your concerns," she said calmly, "but I've been trained for this. I know my job, and I'll do whatever it takes to bring everyone home safely." The team leader, a quiet man with steel gray eyes, studied Sarah for a long moment before speaking. "We'll see, Doc. This isn't like treating soldiers on a secure base. Where we're going, there won't be backup. There won't be evacuation helicopters standing by. If someone gets hit, you're all they've got." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. These men were testing her, seeing if she would crack under pressure before they even left the base. She understood that their skepticism came from a place of concern. They needed to know they could trust her completely. The briefing continued with details about the mission. They would be inserted into a remote valley where intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding. The team would have to move quickly and quietly, with minimal equipment. Sarah would carry standard medical supplies plus additional trauma gear in case of heavy casualties. As the meeting concluded, the team members filed out, still talking quietly among themselves. Sarah could hear fragments of their conversation. Concerns about having an unknown medic, questions about her experience, doubts about whether she could keep up physically. She tried not to let it bother her, but their words stung. That evening, Sarah found herself alone in the base gym, working out harder than usual. She ran on the treadmill until her legs ached, then moved to the weight room to work on her upper body strength. She knew she would never be as physically powerful as the SEALs, but she could make sure she was in the best shape possible. Can't sleep either, Sarah turned to see the team leader standing in the doorway. Up close, she could see he was older than the others, probably in his mid-30s, with scars on his hands that spoke of years of combat experience. Just making sure I'm ready, sir, she replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. He walked over and sat on a nearby bench. The guy's giving you a hard time? Sarah considered lying, saying everything was fine, but something about his direct manner made her want to be honest. They have their doubts about me. I understand why. You know why I chose you for this mission? He asked. Sarah shook her head. Because when that IED went off last week and they brought in casualties, you didn't hesitate. You didn't panic. You did your job and you did it well. That's what I need from a team member. His words meant more to Sarah than he probably realized. To have an experienced operator acknowledge her skills gave her confidence she hadn't felt since arriving at the briefing. The guys will come around, he continued. They just need to see you in action. But I want you to know something. Out there, we're all equals. Doesn't matter if you're a SEAL or a medic, male or female. What matters is that you can do your job and watch each other's backs. Sarah nodded, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Doc. Get some rest. We move out in 48 hours. As Sarah walked back to her quarters that night, she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. In 2 days, she would be tested in ways she had never imagined. Everything she had learned, every skill she had developed, would be put to the ultimate test. She thought about her brothers, wondering what they would think of their little sister going on a mission with Navy SEALs. The next day was spent in final preparations. Sarah went through her medical equipment piece by piece, ensuring everything was in perfect working order. She practiced emergency procedures until she could perform them blindfolded. She studied maps of the area where they would be operating, memorizing potential landing zones for evacuation helicopters. The team leader, who she learned was called Chief Peterson, stopped by to check on her progress. He watched as she organized her medical supplies with military precision, each item in its designated place. You know, he said, the first female to graduate from Navy SEAL training probably felt a lot like you do right now. Sarah looked up, surprised. There's a female SEAL? Not yet, but there will be someday. Times are changing, Doc. People like you are proving that what matters isn't your size or gender, it's your heart and your skills. That night, Sarah barely slept. She went over the mission parameters in her mind, visualizing different scenarios and how she would respond. She thought about the medical procedures she might need to perform under fire, the weight of the equipment she would carry, and the trust these elite warriors were placing in her. Tomorrow, she would find out if she was truly ready for what lay ahead. The quiet girl from Texas was about to face the biggest challenge of her life, and there was no turning back now. The helicopter flew low through the mountain valleys, its rotors barely audible over the wind. Sarah sat between two heavily armed SEALs, her medical pack secured tightly against her chest. The pre-dawn darkness made it impossible to see the terrain below, but she could feel the aircraft banking and turning as it followed the planned route to avoid enemy radar. Chief Peterson sat across from her, his eyes closed but clearly not sleeping. The other team members checked their weapons and equipment for the 100th time. Sarah had learned their names during the brief training period before departure. Rodriguez, the communications specialist with kind eyes and a ready smile. Thompson, the demolitions expert who never seemed to stop moving. Jackson, the sniper who spoke in whispers. And Williams, the bearded SEAL who had questioned her qualifications. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 5 minutes to insertion. Sarah felt her stomach clench. This was it, the moment when all her training would be put to the test. She ran through her mental checklist one more time. Medical supplies organized by priority. Trauma procedures memorized. Emergency evacuation protocols understood. She was as ready as she could be. The helicopter began its descent, and Sarah could see the landing zone through the small window, a flat area surrounded by rocky hills. The terrain looked harsh and unforgiving, exactly the kind of place where dangerous people might hide. As they touched down, the SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing their gear and preparing to exit. Stay close to me until we reach the objective, Chief Peterson told Sarah as they prepared to leave the aircraft. Once we're in position, you'll set up the casualty collection point. Remember, if things go bad, your job is to keep people alive until we can get them out. The helicopter's rotors were still spinning as the team jumped out and moved away from the landing zone. Within seconds, the aircraft lifted off and disappeared into the darkness, leaving them alone in enemy territory. Sarah felt a moment of panic as the sound of the rotors faded away, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the wind whistling through the rocks. The team moved in single file through the rocky terrain, with Jackson taking point and Williams bringing up the rear. Sarah was positioned in the middle of the formation where she would be most protected. The SEALs moved like ghosts, their footsteps nearly silent even on the loose rocks. Sarah tried to match their pace and stealth, grateful for the extra physical training she had done. They traveled for 2 hours through increasingly difficult terrain. The mountains rose around them like sleeping giants, and Sarah could understand why this area was considered a perfect hiding place for terrorists. There were countless caves, hidden valleys, and escape routes. Finding their target would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. As dawn began to break, Chief Peterson called a halt. They had reached a ridge overlooking their objective, a small compound nestled in a valley below. Through binoculars, Sarah could see several buildings surrounded by walls, with guards posted at regular intervals. Smoke rose from cooking fires, indicating the place was occupied. "Intel was right," whispered Rodriguez, studying the compound through his scope. "Looks like at least 20 fighters down there, maybe more." Chief Peterson spread out a map and gathered the team around him. "Here's how we're going to do this," he said quietly. "Jackson, you'll provide overwatch from this position. Thompson, you'll breach the main gate. Williams and Rodriguez will clear the buildings. Doc, you'll establish your aid station here, behind this rock formation." Sarah studied the position he had indicated. It offered good cover and was close enough to the compound to reach wounded team members quickly, but far enough away to avoid the initial fighting. She nodded her understanding. "Questions?" the chief asked. Williams raised his hand. "What if we take heavy casualties? Doc's good, but she's just one person." "Then we adapt and overcome," Peterson replied firmly. "That's what we do. Doc has proven herself capable, and I trust her to do her job. You focus on yours." Sarah felt a flash of gratitude toward the team leader for defending her, but she also understood Williams' concern. If multiple team members were wounded, she would be pushed to her limits. She made a mental note to prioritize the most critical cases first and work her way down. The team spent the next hour observing the compound and refining their plan. Sarah used the time to set up her aid station, organizing medical supplies and preparing for different types of casualties. She found herself thinking about the young private she had treated after the IED explosion, remembering how his fear had motivated her to stay calm and focused. As the sun climbed higher, activity in the compound increased. Men moved between buildings, some carrying weapons, others going about what appeared to be daily routines. Sarah watched through binoculars as children played in a courtyard, and her heart sank. This wasn't just a terrorist hideout, it was a place where families lived. "Chief," she whispered, "there are kids down there." Peterson took the binoculars and studied the compound for a long moment. "I see them," he said quietly. "Rules of engagement remain the same. We protect innocent civilians at all costs. But our target is still in there, and we have our orders." The tension was building as 0 hour approached. Sarah could feel her heart beating faster, and her mouth was dry despite the water she had been sipping. She went through her mental checklist again, making sure she was ready for anything. The lives of these elite warriors might depend on her skills in the next few hours. "All right, people," Chief Peterson said as he checked his watch. "We go in 5 minutes. Remember, we're here for the high-value target. Get in, get him, get out. Minimal contact with hostiles if possible." The team members made their final preparations, checking weapons and equipment one last time. Sarah arranged her medical supplies so she could reach anything she needed quickly, even in darkness. She thought briefly about her family back home, wondering what they would think if they could see her now. "Doc," Williams said quietly, approaching her position. "Look, I know I gave you a hard time earlier. Nothing personal. I just needed to know you could handle this." Sarah looked at the big SEAL, seeing something different in his eyes now. Maybe it was respect, or maybe just acceptance. Either way, it felt like a victory. "I understand," she replied. "I hope I don't let you down." "You won't," he said with certainty. "Chief doesn't make mistakes about people." The attack began at exactly 0800 hours. Thompson's explosive charge blew the main gate off its hinges, and the SEALs moved into the compound with precision and speed. Sarah watched from her position as muzzle flashes erupted from buildings and the sound of gunfire echoed off the mountain walls. Everything went according to plan. The team moved through the compound systematically, clearing buildings and searching for their target. Sarah could hear their voices over the radio, calm and professional despite the chaos around them. Then, everything went wrong. "Contact rear!" Jackson's voice crackled through the radio from his overwatch position. "Large force approaching from the north. Looks like 30 to 40 fighters." The team was about to be outnumbered and surrounded. She grabbed her radio and switched to the emergency frequency to call for extraction, but all she got was static. Something was jamming their communications. The sound of gunfire intensified as the new threat engaged the team. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see the SEALs taking cover behind buildings and walls, returning fire at targets she couldn't identify. The tactical advantage they had enjoyed was rapidly disappearing. "Doc, we've got wounded." Rodriguez's voice came through on the short-range radio. "Williams is hit bad. Needs immediate attention." Sarah felt time slow down as adrenaline flooded her system. This was the moment she had trained for, the test of everything she had learned. She grabbed her medical pack and ran toward the compound, keeping low to avoid the bullets that seemed to be coming from every direction. She found Williams behind a low wall, blood seeping through his combat uniform from a wound in his shoulder. He was still conscious, but clearly in pain, his face pale with shock. Sarah immediately went to work, cutting away his uniform to assess the damage. "How bad is it, Doc?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Bullet went through clean," Sarah replied, working to control the bleeding. "You're going to be fine, but I need to stabilize you before you can fight." As she worked on Williams, Sarah became aware that the gunfire was getting closer. The enemy fighters were pushing into the compound, and the SEALs were being forced to give ground. She could hear Chief Peterson shouting orders over the radio, trying to coordinate their defense. "Doc, we need to move," Thompson called out as he ran past, firing at targets Sarah couldn't see. "They're flanking us." Williams was stabilized but still needed medical attention, and she could see other team members who appeared to be wounded. The original plan was falling apart, and they were running out of options. That's when she noticed something that changed everything. About 50 meters away, partially hidden behind a damaged wall, was an enemy machine gun position that was pinning down Jackson and Rodriguez. The gunner was focused on the SEALs and hadn't noticed Sarah's position. She thought about her training, about the weapons instruction she had received but never expected to use. Every soldier was trained to fight, not just the specialists. Her rifle was slung across her back, loaded and ready. The machine gun position was preventing her teammates from maneuvering, and if someone didn't do something about it soon, they would all be trapped. Sarah looked at Williams, who had noticed her staring at the enemy position. "Doc, whatever you're thinking, don't do it," he said urgently. "That's not your job." But Sarah was already moving. She dropped her medic bag next to Williams and unslung her rifle. Her hands were steady as she took aim at the machine gunner, remembering everything she had learned about combat marksmanship. The distance was well within her effective range, and she had a clear shot. Time seemed to freeze as Sarah made her decision. She was a medic, trained to save lives, not take them. But right now, taking one life might save the lives of her entire team. Her finger found the trigger, and she took a deep breath. The shot echoed across the compound, and the enemy machine gunner slumped forward over his weapon. The suppressing fire that had been keeping Jackson and Rodriguez pinned down suddenly stopped. Sarah could hear the team leader's voice over the radio. "Good shot! Jackson, Rodriguez, move to Building 3! But Sarah's action had consequences. Her muzzle flash had revealed her position, and now enemy fighters were turning their attention toward her. Bullets began impacting the rocks around her position, sending chips of stone flying through the air. "Doc, get down!" William shouted, trying to reach his own weapon despite his injury. Sarah dropped behind cover, her heart pounding. She had just taken her first life in combat, and the reality of it was hitting her hard. But there was no time to process the emotions. The mission was still ongoing, and her teammates still needed her. She could hear Chief Peterson's voice on the radio. "All elements were compromised. Prepare for emergency extraction. Doc, can you get Williams mobile?" Sarah looked at the wounded SEAL, who was trying to stand despite his injury. "Can you walk?" she asked. "I can do whatever you need me to do, Doc." he replied with determination. The sound of helicopters in the distance gave Sarah hope. The extraction aircraft were coming, but they would need to reach the landing zone while under fire from enemy forces. She helped Williams to his feet, supporting his weight as they prepared to move. "Listen up, people!" Chief Peterson's voice came through clearly on the radio. "We're moving to the alternate LZ in 2 minutes. Doc, you and Williams move first. We'll provide cover." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. Getting Williams to safety was now her primary mission, but she also knew the other team members were counting on her medical skills if anyone else was wounded during the withdrawal. As they prepared to leave their cover, Williams grabbed her arm. "Doc, what you did back there, taking out that machine gun, that was something else. The guys won't forget that." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had crossed a line today, from medic to combatant, and there would be no going back. But if it meant her teammates would make it home alive, she could live with that decision. The extraction was going to be the most dangerous part of the mission, and Sarah knew that everything depended on the next few minutes. The withdrawal to the extraction point was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Supporting Williams' weight while carrying her medical equipment, she moved through the rocky terrain as bullets whistled overhead. The other team members provided covering fire, their movements coordinated despite the chaos surrounding them. Chief Peterson appeared beside her, his rifle ready as he scanned for threats. "How's Williams holding up?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the surrounding hills. "He's stable but losing blood," Sarah replied, adjusting her grip on the wounded SEAL. "We need to get him to a proper medical facility soon." The sound of helicopters grew louder, and Sarah could see 2 aircraft approaching the alternate landing zone. But between their current position and the LZ, enemy fighters were trying to cut off their escape route. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Jackson, talk to me," Peterson called into his radio. "Multiple contacts moving to intercept," came the sniper's voice. "I can see at least 15 fighters positioning themselves between us and the LZ. We're going to have to fight our way through." Sarah felt Williams lean more heavily against her. Looking at his face, she could see he was weakening from blood loss despite the field dressing she had applied. They needed to reach medical evacuation quickly, but the enemy was making that increasingly difficult. "Doc, I can still fight," Williams said, though his voice lacked its usual strength. "No, you can't," Sarah replied firmly. "Your job right now is to let me get you out of here alive." Thompson appeared from behind a large boulder, his face grim. "Chief, we've got a problem. The direct route to the LZ is completely blocked. We're going to have to go around, and that's going to take time we don't have." Sarah looked at the situation unfolding around them. The enemy had them partially surrounded, and Williams needed immediate medical attention. The extraction helicopters couldn't land under fire, which meant the team had to clear the landing zone before the aircraft could pick them up. That's when she made a decision that would change everything. "Chief," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them, "I can get Williams to the LZ faster if I go alone. I know these mountains from studying the maps, and I'm smaller, harder to spot." Peterson looked at her with surprise. "Doc, that's not happening. We don't leave team members behind." "And you're not leaving me behind," Sarah insisted. "You're letting me do my job. Williams needs medical evacuation now, not after we fight our way through 15 enemy fighters. If I can get him to the LZ, the helicopters can extract him while you deal with the threat." Williams tried to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "This is a medical decision." The team leader studied her face for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks. Around them, the sound of gunfire was getting closer as the enemy fighters tightened their positions. Time was running out. "What's your route?" Peterson asked finally. Sarah pointed to a series of ridgelines that ran parallel to the valley floor, up through those rocks, then down to the LZ from the north. "It's longer, but there's better cover, and it avoids the main enemy positions." "That's rough terrain, especially carrying wounded," Rodriguez pointed out, having joined their impromptu strategy session. "I can handle it," Sarah said with confidence she didn't entirely feel. Peterson made his decision. "Do it. Take Williams and get to that LZ. We'll keep the enemy busy down here and join you when we can." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders again. She was about to attempt something that would test every skill she had learned, both as a medic and as a soldier. But Williams needed help, and she was the only one who could provide it. "Give me your rifle," Williams said weakly as Sarah prepared to move. "You can't fight in your condition," she replied. "Not for me, for you. Doc, where you're going, you might need more firepower than that sidearm." Sarah looked at the assault rifle Williams was offering. It was heavier than her standard weapon but more powerful. In enemy territory, with a wounded teammate depending on her, every advantage mattered. "Thanks," she said, taking the weapon and checking its condition. The rifle was well maintained, with a full magazine and one round in the chamber. She slung her own weapon across her back and secured Williams' rifle where she could access it quickly. "You two watch each other's backs," Peterson said as Sarah helped Williams to his feet. "We'll see you at the LZ." The climb into the rocks was harder than Sarah had anticipated. Williams was a big man, and even with his help, supporting his weight over rough terrain was exhausting. But she pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that his life depended on her getting him to safety. They had been climbing for 20 minutes when Williams suddenly stopped. "Doc, we've got company," he whispered. Sarah looked in the direction he was pointing and saw two enemy fighters working their way through the rocks, about 100 meters away. They hadn't spotted Sarah and Williams yet, but they were moving in their direction. "Can you take cover behind those rocks?" Sarah asked, indicating a position that would provide concealment. Williams nodded and made his way to the hiding spot, moving as quietly as possible despite his injury. Sarah took position where she could observe the approaching fighters while remaining hidden. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady on Williams' rifle. The two men moved closer, scanning the terrain carefully. Sarah realized they were probably part of a search team looking for the SEALs. If they continued on their current path, they would discover Williams's hiding position within minutes. Sarah thought about her options. She could try to remain hidden and hope the fighters passed by without seeing them. But if they were discovered, Williams was in no condition to fight, and 2-against-1 odds in rocky terrain would be difficult. The alternative was to take action before they were spotted. The decision was made for her when one of the fighters called out to his companion and pointed directly at Williams' position. They had seen something, maybe movement, maybe equipment, that had given away their location. Sarah took careful aim and fired twice in quick succession. Both enemy fighters dropped, and the mountainside fell silent again. She waited for several minutes, listening for any indication that other fighters had heard the shots, but the sound of battle in the valley below had apparently masked the noise. Williams emerged from his hiding place, looking at Sarah with something that might have been respect. "Nice shooting, Doc. You just saved both our lives." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. In the space of one day, she had killed 3 people. She had become a medic to save lives, not take them. But each time her actions had protected her teammates. She had to believe that counted for something. They continued climbing, and Sarah found herself thinking about the choice she had made to become a combat medic. She had wanted to heal, to help, to bring people home safely. Today, she was doing exactly that, just not in the way she had originally imagined. The ridgeline provided an excellent view of the valley below, where Sarah could see muzzle flashes as her teammates continued to engage the enemy force. The helicopters were circling at a safe distance, waiting for the landing zone to be secured. Everything depended on the next few minutes. "How you holding up?" Sarah asked Williams as they prepared for the descent to the LZ. "I'll make it," he replied, though she could see the effort it was costing him. "Doc, when we get back, I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do. I questioned whether you belonged on this team. I was wrong. You're not just a medic who can fight. You're a warrior who can heal. There's a difference." Sarah helped Williams down the rocky slope toward the landing zone. The terrain was treacherous, with loose stones and hidden crevices, but she took her time and made sure each step was secure. Getting this far only to lose Williams to a climbing accident would be unacceptable. As they reached the bottom of the ridge, Sarah could see the landing zone clearly. It was a flat area surrounded by low hills, currently empty but with good approaches for helicopters. The problem was that enemy fighters were positioned on some of the surrounding hills, making it dangerous for aircraft to land. "Chief, this is Doc," Sarah called on her radio. "Williams and I are at the LZ, but there are enemy positions on the hills to the east and south." "Copy that, Doc," came Peterson's reply. "We're moving to your position now. Can you neutralize those positions?" Sarah studied the enemy fighters through her binoculars. There were at least 6 men in 2 separate positions, both with clear fields of fire over the landing zone. Taking them out would require exposing herself to return fire, but it was the only way to make the LZ safe for helicopter operations. "Williams, can you provide covering fire?" she asked. The wounded SEAL managed a weak smile. "Doc, after what you've done today, I'd follow you anywhere." Sarah positioned Williams where he could observe one of the enemy positions while she moved to engage the other. The plan was simple but dangerous. She would draw their attention while Williams took whatever shots he could manage in his condition. Moving carefully through the rocks surrounding the landing zone, Sarah worked her way into position. The enemy fighters were focused on the approaches to the LZ, not expecting an attack from behind their positions. This gave her the element of surprise, but only for the first few shots. Sarah took aim at the nearest enemy position and opened fire. Her first shots were accurate, eliminating 2 fighters before they could react. But the remaining enemies quickly identified her position and began returning fire, forcing her to take cover behind the rocks. From his concealed position, Williams engaged the second group of fighters. Despite his wound, his shots were accurate, and Sarah could see enemy fighters falling. But there were more fighters than they had initially spotted, and reinforcements seemed to be arriving from other positions. "Doc, this is Jackson," came the sniper's voice over the radio. "I've got eyes on your position. There are more fighters moving to flank you from the north." Sarah looked in the direction Jackson had indicated and saw additional enemy fighters working their way through the rocks. She was about to be surrounded, with Williams too injured to move quickly and the extraction helicopters still unable to land safely. That's when she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distinctive crack of Jackson's sniper rifle. The enemy fighters who had been trying to flank her position dropped one by one as the expert marksman engaged them from his overwatch position. "Chief, this is Doc," Sarah called on her radio. "LZ is almost clear. How long until you reach my position?" 2 minutes out," Peterson replied. "The enemy force in the valley is pulling back. I think they're running low on ammunition." Sarah continued engaging the remaining enemy positions around the landing zone. Her ammunition was running low, and she had to make every shot count. But her marksmanship training was paying off, and the enemy fighters were finding it difficult to maintain their positions under accurate fire. Williams had managed to eliminate the fighters on the eastern hill, though the effort had clearly cost him. When Sarah reached his position, she could see that he was losing consciousness from blood loss, despite the field dressing she had applied earlier. "Stay with me," Sarah said, checking his pulse and breathing. "The helicopters are coming." As if summoned by her words, Sarah could hear the sound of rotor blades approaching. The medical evacuation helicopter was making its approach to the landing zone, with a gunship providing escort and suppressing fire on any remaining enemy positions. The rest of the team appeared at the edge of the landing zone just as the helicopter touched down. Chief Peterson, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Jackson ran toward the aircraft while Sarah prepared Williams for evacuation. The mission had been successful. They had eliminated their target and were bringing everyone home alive. As the helicopter lifted off with Williams secured inside, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The wounded SEAL squeezed her hand as the medics took over his care, and she could see in his eyes that he was going to be all right. Chief Peterson sat down beside her as the helicopter climbed away from the valley. "Outstanding work, Doc," he said over the noise of the rotors. "You saved William's life, and probably all of ours." Sarah looked out the window at the mountains falling away below them. In the space of 1 day, she had been tested in ways she never imagined. She had made decisions that went against everything she thought she knew about herself. But she had also proven that she could do whatever was necessary to bring her teammates home safely. "Chief," she said quietly, "I killed 3 people today." "Doc, you saved 5 lives today. Mine, Williams's, Rodriguez's, Thompson's, and Jackson's. That's what matters." Back at the forward operating base, word of the mission spread quickly. The story of how the quiet medic from Texas had dropped her medical bag, picked up a rifle, and helped save an entire team of Navy SEALs became legend almost overnight. But for Sarah, the real victory was seeing Williams walk out of the medical facility 3 days later, his arm in a sling but very much alive. The team members never treated her the same way after that mission. The skepticism and testing were gone, replaced by genuine respect and acceptance. She had proven herself in the most extreme circumstances possible, and they would never forget it. Williams found her at the base gym a week later, working out as she always did. His arm was still in a sling, but he was mobile and healing well. "Doc," he said, approaching her with something that looked like embarrassment on his face, "I never properly thanked you for what you did out there." Sarah looked at the big SEAL, remembering the moment she had made the decision to pick up a rifle and fight. "You would have done the same for me." "Maybe," Williams replied. "But the thing is, Doc, I always knew I could fight when I had to. You discovered something about yourself out there that you didn't know existed. That takes real courage." Sarah thought about his words as she continued her workout. He was right. She had discovered something about herself in those mountains. She was still a healer, still committed to saving lives and bringing soldiers home safely. But now she knew that sometimes saving lives meant being willing to fight for them. The mission had changed her in ways she was still understanding. She would never be the same quiet girl from Texas who had enlisted just to help people, but she was something more now, a warrior healer, who could do whatever the situation demanded. Word of Sarah's actions had reached higher command levels, and she soon found herself receiving commendations and offers for advanced training. Special operations units were actively recruiting medics who had proven they could function in the most demanding circumstances. But Sarah wasn't interested in glory or recognition. She was interested in doing her job and making sure her teammates came home alive. Whether that meant treating their wounds or fighting alongside them, she was ready for whatever came next. The SEALs had stopped laughing the moment she picked up that rifle. Now they looked at her as one of their own, a warrior who just happened to carry medical supplies instead of extra ammunition. And for Sarah Martinez, the quiet girl who had wanted nothing more than to save lives, that respect meant everything. She had found her place in the world, and it was exactly where she belonged, standing with the finest warriors in the world, ready to heal or fight as the mission required. The medic bag and the rifle were just tools. What mattered was the heart and courage of the person carrying them. In the end, Sarah had proven that the greatest warriors aren't necessarily the ones who are quickest to fight, but the ones who are willing to do whatever is necessary to protect the people who matter most. She had crossed that line when her teammates needed her, and she would cross it again if she had to. The mountains of Afghanistan had tested her in ways she never imagined, and she had passed every test. Now, as she prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah knew that she was ready for anything the world might throw at her. She was no longer just a medic or just a soldier. She was both, and that combination made her more formidable than anyone had ever expected.